case of the green bicycle murder, Part 2. As a reminder, in Part 1 we heard about how Bella Wright was discovered near a village in Leicestershire, UK, how the doctor initially missed bullet holes through the head of Wright, which then gave rise to a murder investigation. We heard how a year later a bicycle was found in a river in Leicestershire, and this matched the description of a bicycle ridden by an unknown man with Bella on the day of her death, and how, despite attempts to erase the serial number, it was traced to a man who was subsequently arrested for the crime. That man was Ronald Light. Ronald Vivian Light was born on the 19th of October 1885. He was the son of a wealthy engineer who managed a Colville colliery, and was reportedly also an inventor of plumbing devices. According to a prosecution brief from the murder trial, Light was expelled from Oakham School in 1902 at the age of 17 for lifting a little girl's clothes over her head. The same brief states that in his 30s he attempted to seduce a 15-year-old girl and had admitted to engaging in improper conduct with an 8-year-old. Light graduated as a civil engineer before gaining employment as a draftsman. He would be fired from the firm in August 1914, suspected of setting a fire in a cupboard and of drawing indecent graffiti in a lavatory. Light was later dismissed from employment at a farm, accused of setting fire to the haystacks. In May 1910, Light purchased a green BSA folding bicycle from Autumn Brothers in Derby. This bicycle was a distinctive green colour with an uncommon coaster brake, and at approximately the same time he became a member of Buxton-based Territorial Company of the Royal Engineers. Following the outbreak of the First World War, Light was commissioned as a second lieutenant in February 1915 before being deployed to the Western Front. He relinquished his commission in the Royal Engineers on the 1st of July 1916 on the suggestion of his commanding officer. He then returned to the ranks as a gunner in the Honourable Artillery Company, and he was then court-martialled in 1917 for forging move orders. After 3 years of active service, Light was classified as suffering from severe shell shock and partial deafness, and he was sent back to England to undergo psychiatric treatment. Following recuperation at several army hospitals in England, he returned to live with his mother in Highfield Street, Leicester, and would later claim to have been sent home a broken man. Light emphatically denied ever having been in or near Gulby on the 5th of July or to meeting Wright on that date. He also initially claimed to have never owned such a green bicycle, before, upon being informed of the positive link to his having purchased the bicycle via the overlooked serial number on the fork, he then claimed to have sold the green bicycle to an individual whose name he could no longer recall several years previously. Nevertheless, he was identified by eyewitnesses as the individual who had been riding alongside Wright on the evening of her death, including by her uncle. The cycle salesman Cox also identified Light from a police identity parade as being the individual who had repairs conducted on a distinctive green bicycle on the day of Wright's death. His mother's maid, Mary Elizabeth Webb, informed investigators that on the 5th of July, Light had not returned home until approximately 10 p.m, claiming his bicycle had broken down and that he had had to push it home. He had also sold or destroyed all the clothing he had worn that day. Now, after the bicycle discovery, the police decided to undertake a more thorough investigation of the canal around the area where it was discovered, and on the 19th of March, additional pieces of evidence were found. A dozen live .455 caliber bullets, which were found to match precisely the spent bullets found at the crime scene. Light emphatically denied that these were his. Trial. The trial of Ronald Light opened in Leicester Castle on the 8th of June 1920, and Light entered a plea of not guilty. He was defended by Sir Edward Marshall Hall. Now, Hall was one of the most famous defenders of his time, known for his great oratory and skill as a defence barrister. I could make a whole series devoted to his trials alone, which were widely followed by the press and public. The prosecution's contention was that a mile west of Galby, for unknown reasons, Wright had fled from Light, panicked, and headed south on an inferior road that was a possible route home, but not the shortest one. Light took an alternative route with intentions to ambush her, and he had lain in wait at a gate where he shot her in the face once before fleeing from the scene. To support this contention, eyewitnesses and other individuals were introduced to testify as having seen Light in the company of Wright on the evening of her murder, to his ownership of the bicycle and his later efforts to both remove identifying remarks on the bicycle and dispose of the bicycle, the revolver holster and unspent bullets of the same calibre as the bullets used to kill Wright in the River Soar, in an obvious effort to conceal physical evidence linking him to the murder. Furthermore, on his arrest, Light had proceeded to tell the police numerous lies until confronted with either proof or inconsistencies in his claim. The army pistol holster was conclusively identified as having been issued to Light during his army service. Two girls, Muriel Nunney, 14, and Valeria Caven, 12, would also testify to the prosecution that approximately 3 hours before Light had encountered Wright, he had pestered them as they rode their bicycles close to where Wright's body was subsequently found. Unusually, and at his own insistence and on the advice of his barrister, Light opted to testify in his own defence. In his testimony, Light conveyed himself in a well-spoken demeanour. He readily admitted to having lied to the police upon his arrest before essentially admitting to everything testified by the other witnesses presented at his trial, except he denied his possession of the service revolver and Wright's killing, claiming that they had parted company at a junction close to Kings Norton soon after she had left her uncle's cottage in his company. Light would claim not to have known about Wright's death until he had read a Leicester Mercury article on the 8th of July. According to his evidence, he realised the dire predicament he was now in, and worried over the matter for some time before deciding to do nothing beyond removing his bicycle from where he normally stored it in the attic. He claimed he had failed to come forward in response to the police and media appeals to avoid worrying his ailing mother. However, in October 1919, Light took his bicycle from the attic before proceeding to file off the serial numbers from the frame. He took the bicycle to Upperton Road Bridge in Leicester, where he first detached the rear wheel because the machine had a distinctive backpedaling brake, then continued dismantling the bicycle. Each section, except for the rear wheel with its coaster brake, was thrown into the River Soar, and this act was witnessed by a labourer named Samuel Holland, who had been walking to his night shift at a nearby mill. On cross-examination, Light admitted that the holster, bullets and bicycle recovered from the river were indeed his, but he claimed that he had disposed of these in a panic, having read the press coverage surrounding Wright's murder, and noting the general public and media consensus that the man seen riding alongside her on a green bicycle had been responsible for her death. He admitted that, as an officer in the army, he had owned a Webley Scott service revolver. However, he claimed that when posted overseas, he had taken the revolver with him, but not the holster, and that when he had become a casualty, all of his belongings had been left in a casualty clearing station in France in 1918. Overall, Light's version of events, as he presented them to court, could not be contradicted or disproved in any detail. Despite being subjected to 5 hours of cross-examination, he did not contradict himself on a single occasion. In his own words, during the trial, Light made the following comment to explain his initial lies and deceptiveness. "I knew from newspaper reports the next day that she was the girl I had been with just before she died. I knew the police wanted to question me. I became a coward again. I never told a living soul what I knew. I got rid of everything that could have connected me with her, because I was afraid. I see now, of course, that I did the wrong thing." Despite conceding that the prosecution had produced ample circumstantial evidence proving Light had indeed been in Wright's company shortly before her death, Marshall Hall stressed to the jury his client freely admitted the truth of their testimony, before emphasizing the lack of a motive for his client to have killed Wright, adding the two had not known each other before their chance encounter on the evening of her death, and she had not been robbed, attacked, or subjected to any form of sexual assault. Marshall Hall restricted his own examination of Light largely to technical matters. He also questioned the testimony of the expert witness on ballistics, the Leicester gunsmith and gunmaker Henry Clark, who had testified that the bullet which had killed Wright had sustained damage which may have been caused by a ricochet, and that the bullet could easily have been sourced from a rifle as a revolver. This therefore introduced the possibility that a stray shot fired from a distance by another individual could have inadvertently killed Wright, and that as such her death may have been the result of misadventure. Marshall Hall also contended that a person shot at close range from a service revolver would have sustained much greater damage to their face, whereas Wright only had a small entry wound beneath her left eye, and a slightly larger exit wound to the right side of her head. To this contention, Clark replied, "It depends on the velocity." Marshall Hall argued that this alternative scenario was a more likely explanation for Wright's death. This theory and Light's courtroom demeanour were apparently enough to instill sufficient reasonable doubt within the minds of the jurors and earn Light's acquittal, as they deliberated for 3 hours before returning with a verdict of not guilty. The verdict on the 11th of June was cheered by many spectators present within the courtroom. Wright was buried in the churchyard of St Mary and All Saints, Stoughton, on the 11th of July 1919. In a ceremony conducted before several hundred mourners, the Vicar of Stoughton, W.N. Westmore, asked all present to reflect on this poor girl who had been taken away from them. Following his acquittal, Light returned to live with his mother in Leicester, where he initially maintained a somewhat reclusive lifestyle. For a time he assumed the name Leonard Estelle. By 1928, Light was living in Lansdowne-on-Sea on the Isle of Sheppey, Kent, and in 1934 he married a widow named Lillian Lester. Ronald Light died on the 15th of May 1975 at the age of 89. His body was cremated at Charing Crematorium near Ashford, and his ashes were scattered in the crematorium's Garden of Remembrance. Light had no children of his own, and his stepdaughter had no notion of Light's trial and acquittal until after his death. With support from British Cycling, Leicester City Council organises an annual guided cycle ride which reenacts the case. Now, for several decades following Light's acquittal, his green bicycle hung on the wall of an Evington cycle shop, although its current whereabouts are unknown. In a Christie's auction held in 1987, an anonymous bidder purchased the bullets and holster recovered from the River Soar and presented at evidence in Light's trial for $6,000. Opinions amongst criminologists and authors alike vary as to both Light's guilt or innocence of Wright's murder, and the actual circumstances surrounding her death. For example, in his 1930 book The Green Bicycle Case, author Herbert Wakefield contends Light was innocent, whereas author Christine East concludes in her 1993 book The Green Bicycle Murder that Light was guilty as charged. A lot has since been made of the contemporary class structure. This, plus a degree of sympathy Light had extracted from the jury in his trial testimony, had played a significant role in his acquittal. Other writers have put forth views and conjecture regarding Wright's death, including the possibility that Light killed Wright accidentally while showing her service revolver, which inadvertently discharged, or that she was killed by somebody else entirely. This accidental killing theory is actually backed by a note supposedly written by the Leicester Superintendent of Police, Levi Bowley, 3 days after Light's acquittal. Bowley's note claims that while in prison awaiting trial, Light confessed to the accidental death scenario to him, and the authenticity of this note has actually been questioned. What are your thoughts given the evidence presented? Personally, I think he was guilty. However, I would say that I don't think it was proven in quotes beyond all reasonable doubt, as is the requirement in a criminal trial. Well, I hope you liked this two-parter. If so, then hit the subscribe button and notification bell so you don't miss out on any future videos. Guilty or not guilty? Let me know your thoughts. Bye for now.